So, hello, welcome to Talk with Sally. Been so looking forward to this conversation with Vlad Komanicky, who is founding partner of Alchemists. So firstly, thank you for taking part, Vlad, and please just share for anyone watching or listening who you are and what your business does.
So thank you, Sally, firstly, for inviting me. It's a great opportunity to talk about interesting topics and delighted to be here. So I am a founder of Alchemists. We are a marketing advisory firm. We work with many, predominantly, I would say, global or at least regional brands in helping them to get the better creative and commercial outcomes from their agency teams and partners. I have a background of, I've spent about a decade on a corporate side in local, global, and regional roles as well, in the companies like Mars, Vodafone, GlaxoSmithKline, and now almost 4 years ago, founded Alchemists, and here we are.
And here we are indeed. I remember very fondly our coffee together when you just launched the business. And this chapter, if you like, of the Talk with Sally series is talking to really esteemed leaders who I know are going to give blunt, honest advice and thoughts under the do or die banner, because no one needs me to share just how tough it is out there. But they do need me, interestingly, to remind them that it has been tough for quite a while. And therefore, I think the pressure that's on people and businesses is back to that word we didn't like to use before, which is unprecedented. It's kind of creeping back into our vocabulary. I'm so sorry. On everyone's lips with the cost of living crisis and all the uncertainty economically now, as well as politically out there in the world, costs is in everybody's front of mind. And Vlad, I'd love your point of view on a really interesting perspective, which is how can creative agencies, being agencies, they're always a bit vulnerable for the pipeline, how can they make cost savings going forward? But also, what would your advice be for how they can help their clients to maintain cost savings, whilst at the same time looking at good budgeting and looking at still being able to take opportunity where they can find it and create it?
By the way, I am not known for not saying it as it is. So I definitely do that. And, with my background, not being from the UK, I don't have that big of a problem with that. So, so definitely, let's go with that. But coming back to your question, one way what we've learned is how many companies are dealing with uncertainty is that they are kind of cutting costs, making sure things are more efficient, etc. So what can agencies do about this cost cutting, how to be on a front foot rather than on a back foot? And this has never changed, but now it's ever more so important than before, is credibly showcase the value that, maybe agency partners are delivering to marketing. And then same if you are a marketer, to think about how do I credibly kind of showcase or present the value that investment into marketing adds to my company internally, to my senior leadership teams. And I think credibility is a critical word here, because I've seen many examples where, the agencies would be saying, oh yeah, we're giving you this value and that value, or marketing team saying, oh, investment into marketing has created all of these great exposures, but you do need to quantify it in a means that will kind of like resonate, right?
I was just going to ask about the word credible, because I completely agree with what you're saying. If we could break it down for people watching, what, from your unique position of advice and expertise, what 3 things really make that demonstration credible? What would a brand be looking from an agency for that credibility? And what would the powers that be within the brand be looking at from their own departments to again go, yeah, this is good spend? Because I think from my perspective, encouraging people to keep the confidence with spend is also important, not just the cost cutting.
You have to think about the audience first, right? So you have to think, who's my audience and what kind of metrics will be credible for my audience? If I'm a CMO and I'm presenting to the CFO and to the leadership team, I would be thinking about how do I show maybe some uplift in sales? How do I show some real results that have changed for a company where marketing had some role in, right? That will ensure that that role that we've had as a marketing will be seen as a credible growth driver. From agency's perspective, again, thinking about how do I show the value to the CMO and marketing versus maybe how do I show the value to, someone who's much more interested in a bit more numbers-based. So for example, for procurement, right? So again, you need to be thinking about your audience. So make sure it's fit for the audience. Second of all, whenever any statement is made, you always think about how do I make that statement believable? Show me the numbers, show what's led to the statement. And by the way, this applies to anything that agency ever presents. It as well applies, for example, in a pitch, right? So if I make some statement, make sure that I will showcase why it kind of sticks. And then often marketing, we deal with emotions, right? And we do need to have that emotional kind of flair to things we do. But any emotional kind of element needs to be versed in a logic. So you need to have both. You need to have emotion and you need to have logic as well.
I think that's, from my angle, especially such a fascinating view, because I would build on that really good advice you just shared around, yes, have everything ready, have your game plan, have your metrics. But I would also say, look, take a moment just to make sure you're believing in it and that your emotions are in check to see this through. I think the current climate, especially in marketing and agency land, takes bravery and to actually hold the nerve. And voice tone, eye contact, but that all comes from the absolute beliefs you have about what you're saying. But your advice on actually getting that clear in the first place and who you're saying it to is gold, definitely gold.
There's also an element of proactiveness of bringing these topics. And I always say be proactive rather than reactive, right? Because if you're just responding to something, you're on a back foot, someone's already thinking probably that you're not doing what you've been asked to showcase. So doing this in a proactive means can really put anyone in so much better spot. You don't want the CFO and CEO asking, so what do you add to our company? You want to be proactively almost like saying, this is what I add. And it's exactly the same for agency. You don't want the marketing or procurement teams to be thinking, like, what are these guys doing? Like, we're paying them this much amounts of money. Are we getting value there? So you don't, in the first instance, you don't want to be there. And that's why this messaging, is very important.
What's your advice, your kind of golden rules that you would give on building those really powerful, successful relationships, especially in this do and die climate?
I wanted to say that relationships are very important, are critical to success. But I think what constituted a great relationship 10 years ago would not constitute to having a great relationships nowadays. And where before relationships were really just about relationships and that human emotional side. Again, today, yes, all of that is important, but you also need to bring that logic and almost like this thinking part into the relationship. So first of all, you need to gain a momentum in building the relationship, right? No one can assume that you will have a great relationship from a get-go, whether that's agency with marketing or marketing with agency. We especially see this happening all the time after the pitch, where everyone's kind of like, you've just been through a pitch exercise. Everyone's excited. Everyone goes into their relationship. Amazing. We have this trust. And then you realize it's much harder than, what you've anticipated it to be. There are so many more issues and hurdles on the road. So therefore, I would say, think about the momentum. Think about how do you actually get to trust each other. It takes time and effort. And it's important to realize that. Then the second thing, what I did want to talk about, it's easy to help when things are kind of going well. It's a little bit more difficult to truly and genuinely help in this relationship, when you're in a storm. So I think it's about, yes, use the good times when you're smooth sailing to develop the relationship, but the real proof points will come in the storm. And that's really when, whichever angle you're looking into this, when one partner will look into the other and think about, are these the guys that are actually going to help me or not? And the third point, what I wanted to talk about is a need to, I almost like put it there, like say, complacency should be nowhere in your dictionary when it comes to the relationship. And it's so easy, especially after you develop the relationship, that you are complacent about. And I've seen it so many times on agency side. We have great relationship with client. It's amazing. We worked for 5 years. It's great. But the more you're kind of like tell yourself it's great, the less you push yourself, the less you innovate, the less you think outside of the box, and the less you prepared you are for the storm, more you assume you're in the smooth sailing, if I were to link it to my previous point.
Yeah, I think that's all about reading the clues, isn't it? Because and also being open-minded with the energy to actually want to find the clues. I think in this market, it's too easy to sometimes kid yourself all's going well. because you don't want to open the lid.
Yeah. And I think there is an element nowadays, especially, we've been talking at the beginning about so many things changing all the time, and we just go, up. It's not almost up and down. It's almost like some 3D, 3D visualization of where we're going. It's much more complex than just, thinking about this as up and down. It's a constant flux that we live in. And I think any leader needs to they just need to accept that they're not in control. So as long as you accept that you're not in control,
yes.
But you could do things to kind of make sure you're kind of don't go too far away from the road you've put in front of you. I think at least it's certainly worked for me in the past, and it's worked in terms of, let's have a plan, but a plan is a bit more like a journey. It's not a defined means of how to get somewhere, because otherwise we would be disappointed.
I would build on that slightly from my perspective to say the only one thing actually you can control is yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Your emotions, your reactions, your subconscious, which has been the hardest thing with fear to sometimes get a handle on. But actually the liberation of also accepting that is the only thing you can control. And even on some days, even that's a hard ask. So looking to the future, if everyone had a crystal ball, I'm not sure if actually would like to look or not right now, but a twofold question, please, Vlad. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts about next year, 2023? How do you view the market? What's your advice to both brands and agencies based on your perspective? And very importantly, therefore, what should any leader watching this be prioritizing for success, for good growth, whatever their goals are next year? What should their priorities be?
That's
Small question. Small question.
Yes, exactly. No. So let's talk about the next year. So let's talk about the next year first. I personally think, I might be wrong, as you said, no one has a crystal ball nowadays, and it would be wrong to assume you have. It's probably a recipe for disaster. But anyway, so thinking what we see today, it feels like that the next year will be pretty difficult. Winter is coming, right? So now we'll see the full impact of energy cost increases on consumers, and it's going to be my guess is that most of the people do not yet know what's coming, and it's not going to be great. This coupled with the fact that in 2023 we'll see, because we'll see first, I would say, bigger wave of remortgages of people who had fixed deals set out in 2021 at low interest rates. 2023 will be the very first year when it will go up. We see all these articles nowadays, mortgages are going from 1% to 5%, and it's a little bit theoretical for most people until it hits you.
Until it hits. Especially with all the cost of living at the same time, hey?
Exactly. It's like, it's a perfect storm. You come squeezed out of the winter with 500, 600, 700 a month, energy bills. Then you realize your mortgage will be 400 a month more, on an ongoing basis. Right, you might have bought at the very limit of what you can afford, which I know in the UK is not that uncommon. I think there has been a stat, I think I've read it in Economist recently, where they said that, 30% of people with mortgage could not afford an increase of 150 per month. So that's certainly a reality. So that's going to hit in. And of course, coupled with inflation overall, right, in everything else. So it's going to be a really hard year. And I think this is the year where we'll see people really rethinking. It will have a major effect on advertisers. I'm pretty sure if you're kind of tone deaf to these things happening, could be very bad for you, right? But also, as with any type of kind of crisis, it brings their own opportunity, right? And most marketing organizations and most agencies will see it as a crisis. I think once you will be able to think a little bit broader, again, coming back to what we've been talking about, it could be an opportunity. I think the second big thing that is happening, and that's been more closer to marketing and the world of marketing, are the changes in the way the data are processed, in the way how the technology infrastructure work, etc. So everyone talks about tech and data, right? Everyone can talk a good talk, I would say, I would think nowadays. I would say few people actually know what it takes to build effective technology and data, infrastructures and ecosystems. We see the macro things happening in the market. There is a whole move to consumer privacy. 75% of digital marketing, it's kind of owned by the Googles and Apples and Amazons and Metas of this world, right? And they are to a higher or lesser degree moved to much more customer privacy. So they will share less data, less information about their customers with us as advertisers. And that has lots of implications. So the third-party data is not going to be as effective as it is now. The companies will need to think about better management of first-party data and then building technology ecosystems around that. And that's a topic of its own, but especially us talking to quite a few CMOs, it is something where they are kind of thinking about, right, so now is the time when I really should be kind of understanding how this whole world works. And it's not easy. So that will have a big effect, and also a big effect on you being ultimately effective in portraying your stories to consumers, right? We always say, if you have a story, you need to say it to the relevant audience in a relevant time, in a relevant means, and it actually needs to mean something, right? It probably shouldn't be just, oh, let's buy something that we have for a discount. It should have some, bit more deeper brand related impact. And the third thing that is going to happen next year, I would like to hope, is that, and we already have seen it in the Q3, Q4 this year, is a move towards sustainability, and sustainability from many facets, right? It's a sustainability of marketing, sustainability of agencies' work, it's sustainability of what we do, but also the broader point of sustainability and what it is that we as an organization do to make this world more sustainable in the long term, right? We have already seen lots of consumers adjusting their preferences based on sustainability credentials. Sure, it's probably going to be offset a little bit, and when things will get tougher, so I think cost will again be a bit will have bigger impact. But then again, those consumers who will make decisions based on your sustainability credentials and what you actually do versus what you talk about, is going to have an impact.
Yeah, sustainability is becoming a bit like the replacement word for purpose out there. It has a danger of becoming a bit too buzzy, but and then a bit too easy to dismiss. But I couldn't agree with you more. Also, from what I'm hearing in terms of what founders are what they're having to show to their private equity people nowadays, it's not about unicorns anymore. It's really about how are you going to have a plan that's robust and sustainable. And also, I think worthwhile. I don't know about you, Vlad, but I think people really want to know whatever they are investing in or whatever they are committing to actually is worthwhile in the world, which could sound a bit glib and a bit, oh, look. But I just think that has a real cut through, even when times are tough.
Yeah.
If someone believes something is worthwhile, they will go the extra mile for it. It's just, I guess the opportunity lands for the marketeers and the brands to work together to really work out what that is and how to then tell a great story around it that does inspire.
Yeah. Quite interesting, bit on sustainability is that we've recently worked with a sustainable kind of energy provider. And what was quite interesting is that the CMO said, if you look at our messaging around sustainability, even maybe last year or, in the past 5 years, it's been about, if you want to be sustainable, you need to, as a consumer, pay a little bit more or do a little bit more or do something as well. And actually, that's not the right message. And actually, there are the best way how to make sustainability stick, on a grand scheme, not just with, 5% of people who really kind of are willing to do something more, is to actually make sustainable things also either easier or more effective, right?
Yes.
And that's the way how to make sustainability stick. The great way how to look into this, at least from our perspective, from a marketing angle, is, for us, sustainable. So for example, there's lots of talk about sustainability in production, right? You fly the crew less, you shoot less, you shoot more effective, you do virtual production, all of those things, right? That's great. But actually, even bigger driver of sustainability in marketing would be, why don't you just create the assets that you're going to use, right? In our experience and based on lots of studies, especially in global companies, 40% of assets that you create never see the light of day, right? So why don't you spend some time identifying what these are and just not do it, right? And if you don't do it, you're more sustainable, but you're also more effective and you're driving more efficiencies. But it's easier said than done because everyone in marketing loves to create, right? So it's kind of hard to stop some of it when it actually doesn't deliver value. So that's a way how to make sustainability discussion a little bit more specific. And again, I personally, I see so many, like you can talk about it, we could talk about sustainability for an hour and not say anything meaningful or anything specific. So for me, as with any of these topics, it's about how do you make it a bit more real, a bit more like specific for you. And maybe this is one way how to do it.
And I think that's a great message also around tackling the challenges on the market currently, how to have good budget for next year and how to make sure you're not just surviving, but you are still thriving where opportunity is. So just to bring that section of our chat to a bit of a close there before I go into a bit more of a conversation about something else, what would be that number one killer bit of advice then, please, Vlad, on if you're leading a brand, what your advice would be, and if you're leading an agency, what your one bit of advice would be for going into next year as well as you can?
Yeah. So I would say if you're leading a brand, I'm not going to put advice on what you should be doing in marketing. I think there are other authorities to do that, but what I would say is that one piece of advice is to spend some time and learn about the entire ecosystem of everyone involved in the creation and in the creation of the stories and delivering those stories to your consumers, right? So think about, how do I make sure that the ecosystems that I am we sometimes say orchestrating, right? Because the role of a CMO and marketing leader is an orchestrator, right? So almost like, how do I select the best people and capabilities internally and externally? How do I connect it together? Think of yourself as a role of an orchestrator and try to not be fearful in admitting which areas you would like to know more about, and then find the right partners who can help you to kind of increase your knowledge of that space. And that by itself can then help to create whichever stories or whichever marketing strategy you go for. If you are an agency leader, don't be afraid to innovate and don't be afraid to lose a little bit with a prospect of maybe gaining something in the future. And then not being afraid to say, actually, you know what, this thing that we do, we might not need to do it, or we could be much more effective, we could be much more efficient, and let's together find that efficiency and reinvest it in somewhere else. In my experience, some of the best agency relationships I've had were when, we've been working with agency and together we've kind of founded areas where we said, okay, this is not really efficient, but if we find some money in there, half of it we'll reinvest into innovation, for example. If you're fearful, it's probably going to happen. What you're fearing. So just approach it, straight head on.
Well, it's the law of attraction, isn't it? What you're thinking about, you tend to attract, even if that's positive or negative. Thank you. Really insightful. So just as we come to the close, there's just two questions left. A lot of people who are guests on Talk with Sally, I've had the absolute pleasure and privilege of having as clients, and you are very much one of those, Vlad. So I'd love to get your view on, investing in mentoring, investing in leadership development. To me, that's something that's absolutely continuous, and actually even more so in difficult climates, as opposed to when the going's good. What was your experience of working with me as a client? And what would you say, if anyone's thinking about investing in their own growth and development, the most valuable thing you got from the investment you made?
I think it's absolutely essential when anyone's dealing with any kind of major challenge. We're all prone to our own biases, right? That's been kind of, behaviorally, scientifically proven that we can't see through our own biases, and that doesn't have to do anything with our intellect. So I think kind of giving that platform an ability to say, but actually, you might be swimming in the swamp and you see the 2 meters around you, but actually there's a whole world, right? And there are other things to consider. So I think getting that different perspective is something that's probably been the most valuable, let's say, even in our interaction, and being able to say, okay, actually there are other things this is about, and there are more important things, or maybe it's not at all about what we think it is about, and it's about something else, right? So I think that's definitely something that I don't think you can get to by yourself. So whether that's, working with someone like you, or whether that's talking to people who will tell you the truth, again, that's it's very easy to tell anyone, what they want to hear, right? It's like, yes, yes, yes. It's much more difficult to tell the truth. So if you have someone like that definitely would be useful. Yeah.
Yeah. And we have definitely had moments of truth together, haven't we? Which I have with all my clients. And I think even also the role you do with your clients, you're there to bring the truth as you see it. Because as you said, everyone's got biases. But it comes back to a point we were talking about earlier, which is the relationship. If you have a great relationship there and you actually trust that person, and therefore will be ready to hear what I call the naked truth, because it will always conquer, that's very powerful. So thank you. Last question. For next year, I'm asking every client in this part of the Talk with Sally series, what are the 3 leadership traits that you think are most important for a leader to really lead and excel well in 2023?
Okay. So what I would say, those 3 things are, first one is capacity and ability to learn new skills, learn new areas, relearn what you have to kind of relearn about the environment that's coming up, right? Because if anything, past 5 years or so have proven to us that we constantly need to adjust, right? And we need to repivot and we need to change.
Oh, yes.
So whether that's skills, areas, approaches, whatever that is, but it's capacity to learn and ability to actually execute on that capacity. The second thing would be, if you learn about new things, it can be very overwhelming, right? It could be too many things. And it's almost like, oh my God, like so many things, technology, data, ecosystems, consumers, ROI, like there are all those things. How do you action the most important elements? How do you identify and then action the most important elements? We have this rule of 3s. It applies in the way how we work, on agency evaluations and setting the KPIs and setting the action plans, right? It's like 3 things and do them. And the last thing would be thoughtful leadership. And what I mean by thoughtful leadership is to lead with just the right combination of business leadership and people leadership. It's almost like this combination of compassion with effectiveness, numbers with emotion, right? And it's very difficult because all of us, we tend to kind of oscillate to one or the other, right? So it's almost like understand, where you are as a leader and try to kind of get into that second space, because I think we do need to be around it, and compassion on its own is great and it can help in the short term, but it's not going to resolve your business problems. Same if you're just focusing on business problems, you might be losing people on the way, and you might not be getting people on board and on the journey with you. But again, talking about it is much easier than doing it. So finding that right makes absolutely critical.
So what I'm hearing there is learn, keep that learning muscle going. Have the ability to prioritize with taking action, very importantly, and checking in on your own leadership, making sure it's thoughtful, that you are balancing well between the emotional needs of your people, but also the real hard business commercial needs, making sure those are working as well as they can to deliver, to get things done.
It's very, very difficult to kind of get that balance right. And we, especially when things get tough, and I see it, with our clients, with the agencies we work with, is that if you're unsure, you tend to kind of get into the place, you need to propel yourself internally from inside and to do that other thing that's not maybe natural to you. I've had to do it myself, so.
Yeah. Oh gosh, me too. Which all comes back to having the right support, the right connection, and is also the ethos to why I do Talk with Sally, which is about being better together. So I'm absolutely beyond sure that the advice you've generously given today is going to be able to help leaders out there who are wanting to take some perspective, benefit from some great expertise, and just also know they're not in it on their own. I think that's a really important piece for going well into next year. And Vlad, thank you. It's been, as I knew it would be, direct, fascinating, deep, profound, but also really helpful. And I really, really thank you for coming on the series.
Yeah. No, thank you, Sally, for inviting me. And hopefully at least some of what I've been talking about would be useful to the, to anyone who will invest their time into listening to this. So thank you as well for having me. And, it's been a pleasure.